Big news on Hogwarts Legacy and the possibility of a multiplayer mode. Avalanche Software is on a major hiring spree and, surprise, they're looking for devs with multiplayer experience. But does that necessarily mean it's for sure in the game? It's been one of the most requested features from fans, and today, this new information we have certainly makes it seem like the devs are headed that direction. But I'm still left with a few questions, which we'll dive into here today. At the time of this recording, they have a total of 7 jobs listed on their site, and in today's video, we'll take a look at each of them here to see exactly what Avalanche is looking for. People of the internet, RetroRaconteur here. If we're meeting for the first time, I'm just a dad who loves games and the stories they tell. We post videos every week here on YouTube, and if you want to stay up to date on all the latest Hogwarts Legacy news, theories, discussion, and even some old school Harry Potter Let's Plays, then consider hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our new videos. So what are all these job postings and what's contained in them? Well, here's the full list as of April 14th, 2021. We have a lead game system software engineer, lead game AI software engineer, people partner coordinator for games, cinematic designer, animator for cinematics, cinematics lighting artist, and community manager. We're going to touch on each one of these here today, but I want to start with the 2 engineering positions. These 2 jobs are nearly identical except for 2 additions under the essentials on the AI engineer position. What stands out here regarding multiplayer is under the good to have section near the end. It's the second bullet point, which reads, quote, understanding of the Unreal Engine 4 multiplayer and network protocols. So it's important to distinguish here that this is not a requirement for the position. It's listed under good to have for a reason. Only the items under the essentials would be the actual job requirements. Now, if you're younger and you may not be familiar with this type of job application language, the good to have is basically something that would help you stand out more than others, but it's not necessary for the position. If you're strong enough in other areas, you could still get the job potentially even over someone who does have the good to have experience. Now, you're probably thinking, well, if this is optional, then doesn't that mean multiplayer isn't happening with Hogwarts Legacy? Well, I don't think it's necessarily that cut and dry. You see, Avalanche is a fairly good-sized team already at this point, and they've been working on Hogwarts Legacy for quite a few years now. I mean, consider that their most recent game was released all the way back in 2017. So it's entirely possible they already have plenty of folks on the team with multiplayer experience, hence why it could be optional for these 2 positions. But what about the other job listings? The community manager is being asked to, quote, help build an engaged and loyal community for our upcoming game, Hogwarts Legacy, a new open-world action RPG set in the Wizarding World, close quote. Community managers are fairly common for big games these days, even single-player ones, but I do think it's worth noting that Avalanche is really striving to build an active and engaged community around Hogwarts Legacy. Now, that alone I don't think indicates multiplayer, but it is safe to say a community manager would be absolutely vital for delivering feedback when it comes to multiplayer experiences. Maybe it's just me and my personal experience with games, but I feel like some of the most well-known examples of top-notch and very involved community managers are usually working with multiplayer games. But again, that could just be me. This community manager position with Avalanche does specifically mention that they're looking for a, quote, passionate gamer with deep knowledge of the industry, particularly RPGs, close quote. So even if they do have multiplayer at some point in this game, I really don't think the single player fans need to worry because it's completely clear to me that creating a strong single player RPG is Avalanche's priority first and foremost. The animator for cinematics and cinematic lighting designer are both set to work on Hogwarts Legacy as well. These jobs are quite technical in nature, similar to the engineering position, and the listings certainly reflect that. There's a lot of interesting qualifications here, but nothing particularly surprising or newsworthy in my opinion. The people partner coordinator appears to be focused more on internal departments like human resources, so while this person will work with and interact with the game developers, they won't have a direct hand in the game development. The cinematic designer will be working on an unannounced AAA title, so nothing there for Hogwarts Legacy fans to analyze. Now, roughly 6 months ago, I made a video about 10 features we need in Hogwarts Legacy. One item I included in that list is multiplayer. I've seen it from so many fans who are just begging for this to be in some capacity. And at the same time, I think it's also a feature that has a lot of single player focused fans really kind of concerned that no, they don't want to go down this road. Now, if you're looking for my best guess on the situation, Here's what I think. When we take everything into account that we know about Hogwarts Legacy, particularly WB's stated desire to focus on live service games, I've got a whole separate video about that. This is something that came directly from WB. They want to focus on games as a service, and I have a video that kind of looks at could they make that work with Hogwarts Legacy. So if we take that into account, we take into account the job postings that mention multiplayer as being a good to have, and the fact that they're hiring a community manager who would be vital to any multiplayer-focused experience, I do expect Hogwarts Legacy will contain a multiplayer mode. However, I don't think it will be there at launch. In fact, this may be something that we don't even hear about until after the game is already out. Here's how I see it playing out. I see them releasing a separate multiplayer mode, maybe even a few months down the line after the game's initial launch. A great comparison for what I'm thinking here would be what Sucker Punch did with Ghost of Tsushima. The game is a fantastic standalone single-player experience, but had a separate multiplayer mode released roughly 3 months after the game's launch. And they really did a fantastic job of keeping this under wraps. It was a big surprise to a lot of people. Now, how was it received? Well, both the game's single-player and multiplayer mode were very well received by both fans and critics alike. Sucker Punch somehow found a way to honor both single-player focused and multiplayer focused gamers, plus the multiplayer update was completely free. What would a strong multiplayer experience look like in Hogwarts Legacy? And how do they make sure that they do justice to both the single-player fans and the multiplayer fans? First off, I think it would need to be a separate mode from the main game, built from the ground up with multiplayer in mind. Don't get me wrong, a Hogwarts MMO where numerous players are exploring the castle together could absolutely work, but that's not what Hogwarts Legacy is designed to be. I think there's still a lot of Hogwarts Legacy fans and people watching the news who don't fully get that yet. This is not an MMO in the vein of something like World of Warcraft or even Destiny. It's an open world action RPG role-playing game, not massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Instead, I think a Sucker Punch-like approach of making a completely separate mode would work best for Avalanche here. There are 3 major areas where I can see multiplayer being absolutely phenomenal for Hogwarts Legacy. Number 1, Quidditch. Number 2, dueling. And number 3, cooperative missions. Quidditch would be perfect and an obvious fit because it's a sport with multiple positions involved. Avalanche could have a mode where we take control of an entire team against another human opponent. But they could also take it a step further by having us control individual players instead of the entire team, which would make it possible for up to 14 total players when you include both teams and all the Quidditch positions. They could have different ranks and leagues, plus the customization potential here would be incredible when you consider the possibility of having the professional Quidditch teams, different locations for the matches, broom and gear customization, and just so much more. I could also see dueling being pretty fun for some 1v1 competitive action. I think here they would want to make sure they focus on making this a highly skill-based competition, probably based on precision and timing. And then, to me, the star of the show would be a cooperative mode that would see wizards and witches team up in raid-like cooperative activities. Overall, I think the biggest thing here is that Avalanche would need to do what feels right for the world and the type of gameplay system that they have in place, which we don't really know a lot about that yet. It's also possible the multiplayer modes could be added down the line as part of multiple DLCs rather than just one big post-launch update. And guys, I really want to hear from you all on this one too. Do you think this means we are getting multiplayer? And do you want multiplayer, more importantly? If you missed that video I mentioned earlier about the top 10 features we need in Hogwarts Legacy, check out the video on the right side of your screen now. Or maybe you're in the mood for theorizing like the Harry Potter days, then you can check out the video on the left side of the screen for my own theory on the Hogwarts Legacy storyline. As always, thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.